Can you tell us about those triangles? What did they mean?
There were 7 color triangles, maybe other colors that I never saw, but a red triangle was political. If it was a German, usually it was a communist, but there were a lot of Polish and from all the occupied countries that, after all, Germany occupied almost all of Europe at the time, and those were political. Then you had the yellow one was Jewish. Then there was a purple one which was religious. You had Jehovah's Witnesses, Seventh-day Adventists, conscientious objectors, a few Catholic priests and nuns who got arrested for one reason or another, and they had a purple triangle. Then you had a pink. Those were the gays. Well, at that time you call them homosexual. Now the homosexuals were mostly all German, because the German army didn't seem to care if a foreigner was a homosexual, but their own people, automatically they gave them 10 years in the clink. So they sent them all in concentration camp because they emptied all the prisons, basically because they needed manpower anyhow. So we had those in the camp. That was a pink triangle. Then the green triangle was all common criminals that were in penitentiaries and so on, mostly German. And those, they made them our bosses, like the capo or the Blockelster, which is a barrack elder, and you had murderers. So for the German convicts, some of them were lifers, for them it was a holiday to go in a camp. They felt almost liberated instead of being in a small cell and sitting there forever and ever. Some were well educated, some were very primitive. I had a school principal who was one of my capos. He had counterfeited money, and I say, how come you got caught? He said, well, I had a mistress, cost me a lot of money, so I printed it and they caught me. Then when I was in the camp of Dora, I had a German merchant marine captain. His name was, like mine, his name was Pierre Berg. And he had killed 5 prostitutes in a whorehouse in Hamburg. So normally they would have executed him. He was drunk at the time, but considering he had good technical training, so he was working, he was our boss. And we had several like that. Then the brown was gypsies. Then there was black. There were a lot of forced labor, especially from Russia and the eastern countries, and somewhere too from France and so on. They weren't locked up in a camp. They were working on farms or in munition plants and so on. They even got a certain amount of salary so that they could go in a bar on a Sunday night or so. And if they didn't show up at work for maybe 3 days for one reason or another, and didn't have a doctor's certificate that they were really sick, they got automatically 6 months in a concentration camp, which was slave labor. But those were the main triangles. Were the green were the bosses, red political, and then in some camps, like we had a majority of yellow triangles, but then in Dora there were hardly any yellow ones. I had a red triangle, but the funny thing was, now in Auschwitz I had triangles. In Dora they didn't give us any triangles. They didn't care what you were in for, as long as you could do the job. That's where I worked on instruments for V1 and V2 rockets.